Woe to Babylon, or Stop Being Stupid Part 10 by Anna von Reitz. According to Semiramis, also known as the Queen of Heaven, the great abomination, the mother of all horrors, and the inventor of idolatry, if you want to rule over people, all you need is a pillar and a post. What you do is take one object, a tall vertical supporting column, and you label it a pillar, and you take another tall vertical supporting column and label it a post, thereby creating a difference between them. Even if the difference is merely a name or a label, it's enough to fool people into thinking a difference exists. This is the essence of divide and conquer. You divide people using the same methods. You apply labels to them and exploit their differences: black and white, rich and poor, short and tall, Catholic and Lutheran, Republican and Democrat, Palestinian and Israeli. This is one of the essential esoteric teachings of Freemasonry worldwide, and it is the foundation plank of the Babylonian slave system, which is now masquerading as the lawful governments of the world. Just call it something different, exploit the differences, United States versus United States of America. But what happens when we wake up like the dumb beasts on Christmas Eve and decide to look and think and talk? Then we notice that Russians and Americans are indistinguishable until they open their mouths, that black people have 5 fingers and toes just like white people, that most of the time the voting records of Democrats are the same as the voting records of Republicans. We've been fed a line. Old Semiramis has been at it again. Having recognized the lies and enslavement of the Babylonian system, and having recognized the pillar and the post routine being played upon us, what do we do about it? We see through it. We stop believing the lie, stop seeing differences where none exist. It's not a pillar or a post, it's a tall vertical support column. We stop paying any attention to the labels. We stop playing the game. We aren't United States citizens, and we aren't citizens of the United States either. We aren't vessels in commerce. We aren't names or labels or numbers. We aren't members of political parties, and at the moment you realize who you are, you set yourself free of all of this Babylonian idiocy. The illusions are shattered like a magic spell, and the simplicity and beauty of life is revealed. So don't wait another moment. Sit down right now and look at what I'm telling you and say, WTH, what have I been thinking? See this and over 700 others on Anna's website at annavonreitz.com. Support her work via PayPal. You spell her name ANNAVONREITZ.com. Number 449, State of States or Stop Being Stupid Part 11 by Anna von Reitz. There are all sorts of definitions of the word state. But when we are talking about government, we are talking about either 1, a non-material juridical entity operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea, or 2, we are talking about a material juridical territory that is geographically defined on the land. I keep harping on this until I'm blind, so I really truly do hope that you are all paying attention. Law comes from religion. Religion, what we believe in, what we consider to be right and wrong, defines what law we live under. That's the way it is, and that's the way it has always been. The international law of the sea derives from the religion of ancient Sumer, first codified as the Code of Hammurabi, and much later as the Roman civil law. The religion giving rise to the law of the sea is satanic in nature and always has been. For its adherents, a lie is a prayer. When you claim to be a citizen or a civilian, you are offering to live under the law of the sea. A United States citizen is an indentured servant, and a citizen of the United States is a slave in this system. And you did this to yourself and continue to do it to yourself every time you open your mouth and ignorantly claim to be a United States citizen or a citizen of the United States. Your corrected birthright political status is as a state national, a Minnesotan, a Virginian, a Wisconsinite, a Floridian. Now, nobody chooses your political status but you. The judges who sits on those benches don't have a word to say about it, and you can release yourself from any political status by rebutting and disallowing it. Just say, I was mistaken and misinformed. Do you want to be a citizen and serve the government and live under satanic law of the sea, or do you want to be a national and have the government serve you and live under the law of the land, which is based on the law of Moses? As things stand, you are presumed to be a citizen and acting as one until you go on the record and claim otherwise. Most Americans are wearing the Satan team jersey and loudly proclaiming that they are on the Christ team instead. What's a judge supposed to believe, his ears or his eyes? Especially when you have apparently eagerly accepted Satan's benefits: credit, usury, bankruptcy protection, unearned benefits, unjust enrichment, federal revenue sharing, institutionalized gambling called insurance, personal bank accounts, corporate bank accounts, in other words, and all the rest of the Baphomet, B-A-P-H-O-M-E-T package deal, including the enslavement and fraud that goes with it. So if you've accepted all the benefits, then you're accepting enslavement and fraud. Why, most of you even lied barefaced and said you were U.S. citizens when you applied for your Social Security, a program that only federal employees and dependents are eligible for, and you lied again when you paid federal income taxes and swore under penalty of perjury that you were a withholding agent, which is a warrant officer in the Merchant Marines. What? Why shouldn't the judge throw the book at you, you miscreant? So far as I can see, you chose this political status. Nobody stood behind you with a gun and forced you to sign any application. Nobody made you claim you were a warrant officer in the Merchant Marines under penalty of perjury. Neither you nor your parents nor your grandparents were ever told any of this. You all acted under conditions of non-disclosure and constructive fraud, and in many cases you were deliberately misinformed, all of which voids any contract. You are purposefully kept unaware that any such presumed contract exists, so that you can't rebut it and you can't object. Hey Guido, what's the one deal you can't refuse? Answer, the one you don't know exists. It's all bunco and all crime. The word of, for example, means without, in the sense of being within or without, outside of, apart from, or belonging to. So, what does a state of state, like state of California, mean? It means the state outside and apart from California. It's not the California state. California state is definition 2 above. Material judicial territory that is geographically defined. It is operated by the California State General Assembly, composed of Californians who maintain their political status as California state nationals. The state of California is definition 1 above, non-material judicial entity. It is operated by the State of California Jural Society, which is composed of Californians who have accepted the political status of citizen. Note the differences: California State versus State of California, Jural Assembly versus Jural Society, State National versus citizens. Nearly every day I get rants and complaints from people complaining about imposters and impersonators occupying public offices, referring to all the state of blank officials. But they have told you who they are and what they are and under what authority they're operating flatly, openly, from the get-go. State of California is a state outside of California. It is foreign. It is not your state. It is not your government. You have just stupidly assumed that it was your state and your state government. These people haven't lied to you, not really. They just step back and let you assume what you were programmed to assume, and you've obliged them. They aren't running your government. They're running their government. They set up their state-of-state franchises, which you mistook for your lawful government, and so you did nothing to take back your tax money from them and run your own affairs and claim your rightful political status. They happily took full advantage. They glutted on your labor and hypothecated debt against your property assets under the assumption that you were indeed a citizen and that you voluntarily adopted that status and that you wanted to live in a democracy instead of a republic, and that you wanted to live under the law of the sea instead of the law of the land, and all the rest of it. And the fact is that until you wake up and correct your political status and form your jural assemblies and operate your states on the land, that's the way it's going to be, and it's nobody's fault but your own if you fail to recognize what has been done to you and for you by your employees. In fact, your mere continued inaction in the face of their usurpations and false claims against you merely lends credibility and support to their arguments that you are incompetent and rendered a ward of the state because you're too ignorant and mentally deficient and uneducated to function in your own behalf. Get on your hind legs, America. Start chewing on every politician and bureaucrat and banker and lawyer in sight. Politely, determinedly, with gusto, demand to know what's going on here. Just who do they think they are? Just who do you think you are? And who do you think I am? Go to your local clubs, the Lions and the Rotary and the do-gooder organizations, the church fellowships, the Chamber of Commerce, and the schools. Spread the news. Ask them why they incorporated all their organizations to escape taxes they never owed in the first place. Was it just for fun? Start buttonholing the police chiefs in the county of blank sheriffs and the state of blank judges and the swarms of lawyers who darken all our days. Tell your sons and daughters and fathers and mothers in the military, ask them what is the Department of Defense Incorporated doing, seizing upon our estates and making guarantees in our names? Why are they creating fake persons in our names? Who gave them any authority to do anything like this? Don't they know that personage is a crime? Show us where there was any declaration of war starting the so-called American Civil War, and where is there any peace treaty ending it? Where is there any actual political authority whatsoever underpinning any of it? It was all illegal and unlawful then, and it still is. A squabble between rival international commercial companies employing mercenaries on our soil and dragging our people into their fights under false pretenses and open fraud. There is no Lieber Code that applies to us, and there is certainly no standing to call what happened here a war. It's nothing but commercial crime and fraud being carried out at the highest levels and left unchecked because nobody is minding the hen house. Checks and balances have been overthrown because the actual states have been vacated by stupid and corrupt politicians who have attempted to sell us all down the river. And the only logical answer is to expose these vermin for what they are and what they have done and reorganize the actual states owned and operated of, for, and by the people of these 50 nation states. Declare your rightful political status, rescind any and all voter registrations, call your public jural assemblies, organize your lawful county, organize your lawful state. Pay no attention whatsoever to anyone carrying a bar card. Let them yammer and threaten and stamp their little feet all they want. Ignore them. There are only two kinds of people carrying bar cards these days: the incorrigibly naive and the incorrigibly corrupt. Pay them no mind either way. Tend your own knitting and get the job done. Bar members are all foreigners, all federal citizens, and they have no right to say one word to us without a validated and undisputed maritime contract in their hand. So just turn and look at them and say, I have a copy of what is supposed to be my birth certificate. Let's read it together. And then observe, oh, this was signed by the registrar, a member of the probate court. So my name and estate was probated when I was just a baby in my cradle. So I was born on this day, and a decedent estate was created on this other file date, all under my name, so you can't tell the difference between my name and the estate name. According to the IRS Form 56, this decedent estate is a taxable entity, separate from the decedent, created at the time of death. But as you can see, I am alive, and I never declaimed anything at 3 weeks of age, and nobody ever told me I was the heir of a vast estate. So just what are you trying to pull here, Fritz? States of states, my big fat rump. It's like a bad joke once you get the punchline. See this article and over 700 others on Anna's website, AnnaVonReitz.com. To support her work, give a generous donation via PayPal, and you spell the name ANNAVONREITZ.com. Number 451, I'm reading from AnnaVonReitz.com, U.S. versus Federal Districts, or Stop Being Stupid, Part 12, by Anna von Reitz. George Washington divided the country into districts for the purpose of administering the duties of the federal government. He has been accused of treason for doing so by those who never comprehended the organization of the government in the first place. While George's detractors rightfully objected he deployed foreign government via the districts established upon our shores, they failed to recognize that the states allowed this by subscribing to the constitutional agreement and delegating the enumerated powers, which are really services to be rendered by the federal entity to the federal government. Foreign it was and foreign it is, but as long as we adhere to the actual Constitution, the federales are allowed to establish their foreign administrative units called districts as they please. The first districts on this continent, however, were not established by George Washington. They were established by Benjamin Franklin, operating as a private contractor and postmaster. Well prior to the Revolutionary War, Franklin established a network of post roads, which he surveyed himself, and a system of postal districts served by these post roads and by post offices. Post roads, postal districts, and post offices are all international service conduits and service areas established on the jurisdiction of the land of the host nation for the purpose of providing postal services. These all exist under postal treaties allowing their presence on our soil. George, for his part, just piggybacked his foreign international service district called United States districts, and later municipal districts doing business as all caps U.S. districts, on top of the pre-existing postal districts. Taken together, these are sometimes grouped together and called federal districts. But over time, the common usage has also been separated along mere functional guidelines, with United States districts coming to be associated with military and constitutionally mandated service functions, and federal districts more often referred to non-military international service areas and facilities such as post offices and free trade zones established by treaty on the land jurisdiction of the various states. Thus, United States districts are administrative service areas established on our land for the purpose of organizing and delivering the constitutionally mandated functions of the federal government entity, and federal districts are underlying administrative international service areas created by specific treaties, most importantly postal treaties, that are held by the states and which predate the Revolution. Now, as you are reading the actual Constitution, you will notice that the founders very carefully excluded the federal government from having any functions or duties related to the land jurisdiction of the states. In this way, they sought to maintain checks and balances so that the federal functions were cordoned off in the international jurisdiction of the sea, and the prerogatives of the states were jealously guarded on the jurisdiction of the land. The only clause in the entire Constitution that allows any function affecting the administration of the states to the federal government is the infamous Interstate Commerce Clause, and even then, properly understood, is merely a guarantee against the various states using tariffs and import restrictions against the free flow of goods from other states in the Union. That is, the Interstate Commerce Clause exists to ensure free trade between states and not for any other purpose of regulation. Thus, the United States is restricted from interfering with the land jurisdiction of the states and the people by the actual Constitution, and all other federal functions are limited by treaties with the states acting under the international powers retained by the states and the people in Article 10, the most venerable of which, the Postal Union treaties, are still in effect. This brings up a very, very important point. The states and the people have retained international jurisdiction over all non-delegated powers. Anything that is not specifically and explicitly delegated to the federal government remains the exclusive right and prerogative of the states and people. As a result of the foregoing circumstance, the United States needed its own district and its own postal treaty and its own postal service, called the United States Postal Service, in order to form a separate seat of government, hence the need to form the District of Columbia. When you see the United States Postal Service, you are using the federal government's in-house postal service, but in order to provide service throughout the country, they are piggybacking on your state's separate postal contracts, post roads, and post offices. They are making use of your postal districts, your state postal districts. This leads to a bifurcation of services under one roof. In federalese, federal government mail is domestic with respect to the United States government and its employees. Take a look at Title 39, United States Code, Section 3003, 1341, and 1342. The use of an all-cap zip code is voluntary per Domestic Mail Services Regulations, Section 122.32, non-discrimination for non-use of zip codes. Also see zip code per Public Law 91-325, Section 403. These citations make it clear that for people living in the states who are not federal employees or dependents known as citizens, the use of the zip code is entirely voluntary, and we are free to reinterpret it as we see fit, should we decide to note it in our correspondence as postal code extension or as rural route number existing outside the federal government's domestic in-house system. You are free to address your mail like this: upper and lowercase John Michael Doe, 1040 Mayberry Street, Rural Route 54615, Black River Falls, Wisconsin, with no zip. Or like this: upper and lowercase John Michael Doe, 1040 Mayberry Street, Black River Falls, Wisconsin, postal extension 54615, instead of John Michael Doe, 1040 Mayberry Street, Black River Falls, Wisconsin, 54615. The first two addresses are private non-domestic mail, and the sender has just been kind enough to reference the postal code to expedite mail service. The third version is domestic mail with respect to the federal United States, and that is government mail at an in-house government address. Obviously, if you are not functioning as a government employee or dependent, you don't want your mail incorrectly addressed, but more importantly, this whole situation points out the underlying dichotomy that has caused us and our nation so much harm. By allowing the United States to presume upon us and to assume that we are one of their citizens, we become subject to their foreign government and governments, both corporate and municipal, and allow them to accumulate evidence against our claim to be free and independent men and women. Thus, through our ignorance and their self-interested bad faith, the federal government operated as a succession of governmental services corporations, has usurped upon us and upon our lawful government, and contrived to paper over our very natures and identities, pretending that we are mere franchisees, or worse, franchises of their own corporations instead of their benefactors and employers. The so-called federal government and its agency contractors have failed to discipline themselves appropriately and failed to properly inform both the public and their own employees concerning their nature and limitations, which has led to corruption and misadministration on a staggering scale. The postal district of your state on the land belongs to you and is operated under Article 10 of the actual Constitution. This unique land-controlled international jurisdiction belongs to you and your state on the land, which is a state such as California state, and not a state of state such as state of California. Just as there are United States district courts operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea with respect to constitutionally mandated duties, there are federal postal district courts operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea with respect to non-delegated prerogatives of the states and people. One of the non-delegated prerogatives is anything whatsoever to do with your actual body and actual estate on the land, which includes the use and possession of your actual trade or given name, which has been commandeered under false pretenses and misused to create no end of mischief in your name without your knowledge or consent. This infringement upon your identity and credit is a form of identity theft resulting in personage and copyright infringement practiced by trademark enclosure. This is a war crime of genocide on paper being practiced against us by gangs of thugs who have also misrepresented the so-called American Civil War as an actual war instead of an illegal mercenary action in their attempt to disguise and justify their actions. Well, folks, now you know all the basics. Use your federal postal district courts to kick the ever-loving stuff out of these vermin and send them packing back to Washington, D.C. to consider their sins. You will need to organize yourselves, repudiate the false claims that you are any form of United States citizen or citizen of the United States, reassert your birthright standing as American state nationals, and reclaim your county and state governments. As you are forming your jural assemblies, you may also form a jural society to operate the federal postal district court your state is owed. Get started. See this and over 700 others on his website, AnnaVonReitz.com. Support her work via PayPal, and you spell her name ANNAVONREITZ.com. Number 452, The Trading Companies, or Stop Being Stupid, Part 13 by Anna von Reitz, reading again from her website, AnnaVonReitz.com. There are some very important things never taught in school. How to be a good parent is one of them. Another is the great frenzy that occurred in the very early 1700s. And another is the truth about the so-called American Civil War. In the late 1600s, the church lost control temporarily of the vast amounts of Spanish gold and silver purloined out of Central and South America during the previous 2 centuries. The unthinkable happened when the laws of supply and demand kicked in and gold and silver were devalued by market forces, just like any other glut on a commodity. At precisely this moment when gold and silver were grossly, if momentarily, devalued, another very odd and important thing happened. The Dutch East India Trading Company disappeared, the largest and richest and by far the most successful international trading company on earth, with more wealth, more ships, more warehouses, more cargo tonnage under transport than all the British Crown trading companies put together, simply vanished overnight like the Templars and Phoenicians before them. Poof and gone. Back then it was still possible to sail over the horizon and disappear, but such a massive commercial operation could hardly do so without leaving a paper trail that leads straight to Westminster and from there to New York in the United States. The Dutch East India Trading Company paid the British for free egress to our shores and paid them handsomely. Names like Vanderbilt and Rockefeller and Roosevelt came ashore. The kingpins of the Dutch East India Trading Company then deployed their ill-gotten profits, gained from stiffing their creditors, and paid a cut to the British Crown. The greed of the British Crown eventually wore thin on this arrangement, and the American Revolution was the result. The oldest and most powerful trading companies went head-to-head for 8 years, and in the end nothing much was resolved. A lot of Americans died, and the American people and their estates were saddled with the costs of this contest. A new and supposedly better government was declared, and life went on. The Roman pontiff had meanwhile regained control of the Spanish gold and silver and sequestered it away from family trusts, bearing the names of conquistadors Rodriguez, Santiago de Valle, and the list goes on. All this gold and silver was the wealth of private individuals and their heirs, but it was guarded and parceled out by church trustees who were careful to restrict access to the funds, except for credit, thus manipulating supply and increasing the value of gold and silver by restricting it. The heirs and beneficiaries had no complaints, as they had all the credit in the world and their assets safely socked away out of circulation steadily gained in value. The church became fat and then fatter on its share of the profit from this and became more involved in worldly affairs and commodity market manipulations and insurance scams and other profit-making schemes. By 1819, the Americans had gotten wind that the British king had secretly issued letters of marque against them and had issued privateer licenses to members of the bar associations. The states ratified an amendment to the original Constitution, putting teeth into a prohibition that had always been part of the agreement, forbidding people in possession of foreign titles of nobility, such as esquire, from holding public office in our government. Despite this, Abraham Lincoln, an esquire and bar member, was elected president in 1860. He could not hold the public office, but he could hold the private office of president, acting as CEO of the United States Trading Company. Most Americans were none the wiser, and in those days there was no internet. Our great-grandparents were fed horseshoe and suckered along, promised the end of Negro slavery, when in fact what the perpetrators secretly proposed was to enslave everyone in a modern system of commercial feudalism that was engineered in Great Britain by Benjamin Disraeli as a means to fund the Raj in India and vastly increase the wealth and political power of Queen Victoria. A century and a half later, the vermin are still at it and using the slave labor of one nation, ours, to enslave others. In March 1861, the Southern state walked out of Congress and in doing so destroyed the original Union created by the Articles of Confederation, 1781. They promptly wrote their own articles and recreated a Union of Confederate States of America. To this day, it is the only actual and lawful union of sovereign states left standing on this continent. The northern states under Lincoln quickly devolved into a military dictatorship. Lincoln assumed the role of commander-in-chief and ordered the members of Congress back into session. They still serve at the president's pleasure, and the long slide into darkness and corruption began. The two old rivals, the remnants of the Dutch East India Trading Company and the British Crown, went head-to-head a second time as the United States of America, respectively. At this point, we note another necessary, nasty truth that is never taught in school. There was, in fact, no such thing as an American Civil War. There is no declaration starting the conflict and no peace treaty ending it. What we euphemistically call the American Civil War or War of Succession was in fact an illegal commercial mercenary war for profit staged on our shores by two foreign commercial companies vying for control of our commerce and our natural resources. This time the Brits nominally won, with the South left in ruins and the North left in bankruptcy, and the American people and their states saddled again with the expense of the conflict. Ever since 1860, this country and the American people have been prey and the victims of British overlords disguised in judges' robes and nice suits of trustees, working the biggest racketeering scheme in human history. We have been literally enslaved in the land of the free for 150 years and forced to pay off the costs of 2 world wars plus the cost of rebuilding Europe and Japan and all under the rankest conditions of fraud and deceit and non-disclosure practiced against us by successive British monarchs, men and women who were all obligated by the most solemn treaties to act as our trustees on the high seas and inland waterways. You will never guess how they did it. By copyright infringement, trademark enclosures, and deceptively similar names deceits. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt came to power in 1932, he ascended the throne of a dictatorial foreign military government that was already well established as the bully boy muscle for British big mouths, and all at American expense. By the time he left office, the vassal Congress had formally granted him over 350 new powers, never established under any constitution, enabling him to rule America all by himself. The actual states of the Union had been bankrupted by assumption, a process of hypothecating debt against them in collusion with foreign creditors, and millions of innocent Americans have been conscripted, enslaved, and enfranchised, all for the war effort, of course. But the wars didn't end, and American industry was never retooled for peace. The British overlords, now working in collusion with their former Dutch enemies to mutually prey upon the Americans, kept us in a perpetual and bloody war for profit all over the globe. Their respective team storefronts, the Republicans and Democrats, had already become a joke by the end of World War II, with the returning GI smirking and saying, "Yeah, they'll select them and we elect them, two different flavors of puke." It would take several more major bloody conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and innumerable smaller police actions worldwide before Americans would begin to wake up and smell the rot. Absolutely everything that has gone on in this country since at least 1860 has been the result of fraud and force and con jobs from people who are supposed to be here on our shores, providing us with stipulated governmental services in good faith, and who have no other legitimate excuse for being here, period. For those unlearned in law, fraud taints everything it touches. Fraud vitiates the most solemn contracts and agreements and treaties. It renders everything proceeding from it null and void, as if it never existed. Everything, absolutely everything that has happened in this country since Lincoln has been tainted by fraud. There is no Lieber Code, no Reconstruction Acts, no War Powers Act, no military districts, no rewritten state constitutions, no Trading with the Enemy Act, no Federal Reserve, no enfranchisement, no District of Columbia Corporation, Municipal Corporation, no income tax, no 14th Amendment, no Constitution of the United States of America, published in 1868, no insular tariff cases, no 350 new presidential powers, no executive orders, no territorial jurisdiction, no Municipal Corporations Act, no lawful declaration of war in World War I or II, no Bretton Woods, no Camp David, no government agencies, no EPA, no FBI, no IRS, no DHS, no mandatory vaccinations, no RFID chips, no national debt, no mortgages, no valid foreclosures, no marriage licenses, no driver's license, says no state statutes published under any private copyright, no federal code since 1860, no uniform commercial code, no federal rules of civil procedure, no national parks, no vast holdings of federal lands in any western state. Toss it all in the garbage can, good and bad, and while we're at it, we might as well toss all the control mechanisms like the two-party system and the monopolized foreign mainstream media too. The only courts having anything to do with us and our assets are postal district courts, run by our own state jural societies operating in international jurisdiction, and national courts run by our own jural assemblies in land-based counties and states. The only valid federal laws are the United States statutes at large. The only valid state laws are those formulated prior to 1860. There are, in fact, no new states that have been added to the Union since 1860. All the western states except California and Texas have merely existed as states in waiting, promised all the rights and prerogatives of a state without actually being enrolled. And no, we don't have to wait for someone to decide any of this for us. We just have to fix the judges and the police with an icy stare and share the information, and get busy forming our own jural assemblies and jural societies, and setting up our own lawful courts and running our own counties and operating our actual states again. The moment we realized that the American Civil War was an illegal private mercenary action, we realized that everything that proceeded from it is fraudulent, and the game is over. All that remains is what has to remain, the American military on watch. The rest is ours to decide, to shape and amend and transcend as we must. As for the all-capital United States and the all-capital the United States of America and the all-capital United Kingdom and all the rest of the criminally complicit corporate governments, when what is true comes, what is false must pass away. That is the actual law and the only law that counts. Read this article and over 700 others on his website at annavonreitz.com. Support her work with a generous donation via PayPal, and you spell it ANNAVONREITZ.com.